The monitors beeped in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. In room 417 of St. Michael's Children's Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, a newborn boy lay motionless inside an incubator, his tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made the nurses avert their eyes when they checked his vitals. He weighed barely 4 pounds, and every specialist who had examined him over the past 11 days had reached the same devastating conclusion. There was nothing more they could do. Outside the glass window of the neonatal intensive care unit, a young mother pressed her forehead against the cold surface, her breath fogging the view of her son. Her name was Denise Carter, 23 years old, a waitress at a truck stop diner off Highway 61. She had worked double shifts until her 7th month of pregnancy, saving every tip in a mason jar she kept hidden beneath her mattress. She had dreamed of a small apartment with a nursery painted yellow, of morning walks with a stroller, of first words and first steps. Now she stood in a hospital corridor at 2 a.m, wearing the same clothes she had worn for 3 days straight, watching her baby slip away. The doctors had explained the condition in terms she barely understood. Something about his blood, about cells that were destroying themselves, about a genetic anomaly so rare that there were fewer than 50 documented cases worldwide. They had tried transfusions. They had tried experimental medications flown in from a research facility in Boston. They had tried everything in their medical arsenal, and still the tiny boy in the incubator grew weaker with each passing hour. The lead physician, a silver-haired man named Dr. Harrison Wells, had taken Denise into a private room that afternoon and spoken the words no mother should ever hear. He told her to prepare herself. He told her they had exhausted every option. He told her as gently as a man could deliver such news that her son would not survive the week. Denise had not cried then. She had simply nodded, walked back to the window, and resumed her vigil. The tears had dried up somewhere around day 7, replaced by a numbness that felt like drowning in slow motion. Her mother had offered to come from Jackson, but Denise had told her no. Her sister had called repeatedly, but Denise let the phone ring until the battery died. There was nothing anyone could say that would change what was happening behind that glass. There was no comfort large enough to fill the void that was opening inside her chest. The night shift nurses moved quietly through the unit, checking monitors, adjusting tubes, writing notes on clipboards. They had seen cases like this before, and they knew the particular silence that settled over a family in the final days. One of the nurses, a woman named Patricia who had worked in the NICU for 27 years, paused by Denise and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. She simply stood there for a moment, offering the only thing she could, her presence. Then she moved on to the next patient, leaving Denise alone with the beeping machines and the gray light of the hospital corridor. 300 miles away, on a stretch of rural highway cutting through the Mississippi Delta, a convoy of motorcycles rumbled through the darkness. There were 18 of them, their headlights piercing the fog that rolled off the cotton fields like smoke. They rode in formation, a practiced symmetry that came from years of traveling together, and the sound of their engines echoed across the empty landscape like distant thunder. The patches on their backs read, "Iron Guardians MC," and the men and women who wore them had a reputation that preceded them wherever they went. To some, they looked like trouble. The leather vests, the tattoos, the chrome and steel of their machines, all of it painted a picture that made ordinary citizens lock their car doors and avoid eye contact. But those who knew the Iron Guardians understood something that the fearful could not see. This was a club built on a simple creed: protect those who cannot protect themselves. They organized toy drives for children in foster care. They escorted survivors of domestic situations to courthouses when they needed to testify. They showed up at funerals for veterans who had no family left to mourn them. They were the kind of people who looked dangerous but acted like guardian angels, and they had been doing it for nearly 30 years. At the front of the formation rode a man named Marcus Cole, 54 years old, with a gray beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. He had served 2 tours in the Gulf War, worked as a mechanic for 15 years after coming home, and founded the Iron Guardians when he realized that the brotherhood he had found in the military did not have to end when the uniform came off. His hands were scarred from decades of engine work, and his left knee ached when the weather changed, but he still rode at the head of every convoy, leading his people wherever they needed to go. Tonight, they were headed to Memphis. A member of the club, a woman named Rosa Delgado who ran a shelter for at-risk youth in Clarksdale, had called Marcus that morning with an urgent request. There was a young woman at the shelter, barely 19 years old, who needed to get to St. Michael's Hospital as quickly as possible. Rosa had explained the situation in hurried sentences, her voice tight with a kind of desperate hope. Marcus had listened, asked a few questions, and then made the call that assembled his riders within the hour. By noon, they were on the road. The young woman rode on the back of Rosa's motorcycle, her arms wrapped around the older woman's waist, her face hidden behind a borrowed helmet. Her name was Amara Johnson, and she had been living at Rosa's shelter for the past 8 months, ever since she aged out of the foster care system with nothing but a backpack and a GED. She was small for her age, with dark skin and close-cropped hair, and she spoke so quietly that people often asked her to repeat herself. But those who took the time to listen discovered something remarkable beneath that quiet exterior. Amara had a gift, though she would never have called it that. She called it paying attention. Since childhood, Amara had possessed an almost uncanny ability to notice things that others missed. Patterns in numbers, subtle changes in color and texture, the way a person's voice shifted when they were hiding something. She had taught herself to read at 4 years old, devouring every book she could find in the various group homes where she had spent her youth. By 12, she was solving algebra problems that stumped her teachers. By 15, she had read every medical textbook in the Clarksdale Public Library, fascinated by the intricate machinery of the human body. She had no formal training, no degree, no credentials that would mean anything to the world of medicine. But she had something that could not be taught, an intuition that bordered on the extraordinary. Rosa had discovered Amara's abilities by accident. One evening, while reviewing case files at the shelter, Rosa had complained about a recurring headache that no medication seemed to touch. Amara, who had been quietly washing dishes nearby, had asked a series of questions so specific that Rosa found herself startled. How long after eating did the headache begin? Was it worse on the left side or the right? Did she notice any changes in her vision before the pain started? Within minutes, Amara had suggested that Rosa see a doctor about her blood pressure, specifically a condition called a hypertensive crisis that could be triggered by certain foods. Rosa had laughed it off at first, but a visit to her physician the following week confirmed everything Amara had suspected. The doctor had looked at Rosa with genuine alarm and asked why she had waited so long to come in. After that, Rosa began to understand what she had in the quiet girl who washed dishes and read medical journals in her spare time. She also began to understand that Amara's gifts were wasted in a shelter, that they needed to find their way into the world where they could do the most good. When the news about the baby in Memphis reached Clarksdale, a story that had made the local papers because of its tragic rarity, Rosa had mentioned it casually at dinner, not expecting any response. But Amara had looked up from her book with an expression that Rosa had never seen before. It was recognition. It was certainty. It was the look of someone who knew something that others did not. "I think I know what is wrong with that baby," Amara had said, "and I think I might be able to help." Rosa had stared at her for a long moment, searching the young woman's face for any sign of delusion or desperation. She found neither. What she found was the quiet confidence of someone who had spent her entire life being underestimated and had long since stopped caring about the opinions of others. Rosa had made the call to Marcus within the hour. Now, as the convoy rumbled through the darkness toward Memphis, Amara closed her eyes and reviewed everything she had read about the baby's condition. The articles had been sparse on medical details, but she had pieced together enough from the scattered reports to form a hypothesis. The symptoms described, the cellular destruction, the resistance to conventional treatments, the rapid deterioration, matched a pattern she had encountered in an obscure medical journal 2 years earlier. It was not a common illness. It was not even a recognized illness in most diagnostic frameworks. But Amara remembered the case study, remembered the outcome, and remembered the single factor that had made the difference between life and death. She just needed someone to listen. The Memphis skyline appeared on the horizon as dawn began to break, the glass towers catching the first light of morning and throwing it back toward the heavens. The Iron Guardians slowed their formation as they entered the city limits, the rumble of their engines drawing stares from early commuters on their way to work. They made their way through the downtown streets with the precision of a military convoy, stopping for red lights, signaling their turns, giving no reason for anyone to fear them. When they arrived at St. Michael's Hospital, Marcus guided them into the visitor parking lot and cut his engine. The others followed suit, and for a moment, the only sound was the ticking of cooling metal and the distant hum of the city waking up. Rosa helped Amara off the motorcycle and removed her helmet. The young woman stood in the parking lot, looking up at the towering hospital building, her expression unreadable. Marcus approached them, his boots heavy on the asphalt, and placed a weathered hand on Amara's shoulder. "You ready for this?" he asked. Amara nodded. "I have been ready my whole life," she said. "I just never had anywhere to go." The automatic doors slid open, and the group entered the hospital lobby. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his coffee, his eyes widening at the sight of 18 bikers in leather vests walking toward him. Before he could speak, Rosa stepped forward with a disarming smile and explained that they were there to see Dr. Harrison Wells regarding the infant in room 417. The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain how to handle the situation, but something in Rosa's voice, calm, authoritative, without a trace of threat, convinced him to pick up the phone and make the call. 10 minutes later, Dr. Wells appeared in the lobby, his white coat wrinkled from a night spent sleeping on a cot in his office. He was a tall man with sharp features and the kind of permanent exhaustion that came from decades of fighting battles he could not win. He looked at the assembled bikers with an expression that shifted from confusion to curiosity to something that might have been hope, though he would never have admitted it. Rosa explained the situation in concise terms. She introduced Amara, described her background, and outlined the young woman's belief that she understood what was wrong with the baby. Dr. Wells listened without interrupting, his arms crossed over his chest, his face betraying nothing. When Rosa finished, he stood in silence for a long moment, studying Amara with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his career evaluating people. "You have no medical degree," he said. "No formal training. No credentials of any kind." Amara met his gaze without flinching. "That is correct," she said. "And you believe you can help a patient that the finest specialists in the country have been unable to treat?" "I believe I see something they might have missed," Amara replied. "I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to listen." Dr. Wells exhaled slowly, running a hand through his silver hair. The hospital had protocols. There were liability concerns, ethical considerations, a dozen reasons why he should politely decline and send these strangers on their way. But there was also a baby dying upstairs, a mother who had not eaten in 2 days, and a feeling in his gut that he had not experienced in years. The feeling that something unexpected was about to happen. "Follow me," he said. They took the elevator to the 4th floor, the bikers remaining in the lobby at Marcus's instruction. Only Rosa and Amara accompanied the doctor, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor. When they reached the NICU, Denise was still standing at the window, her forehead pressed against the glass. She turned at the sound of approaching footsteps, and her eyes, red-rimmed, hollow, fixed on the young black woman walking beside her son's doctor. Dr. I. Wells made the introductions, explaining that Amara was a medical researcher who had traveled from Mississippi to offer a second opinion. It was a generous interpretation of the truth, but Denise was too exhausted to question it. She simply nodded and stepped aside, allowing them to enter the room where her son lay dying. Amara approached the incubator slowly, her eyes moving across the monitors, the tubes, the tiny body struggling for life. She did not touch anything. She simply observed, her mind cataloging every detail, the rhythm of the heart monitor, the color of the skin, the position of the baby's hands. She asked Dr. Wells for the complete medical file, and he handed it to her without comment. For the next 20 minutes, she read through the pages in silence, occasionally pausing to close her eyes and think. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her expression. Not triumph, not certainty, but something quieter, a deep, focused calm. The problem is not his blood, she said. The problem is his liver. Dr. Wells frowned. We tested liver function extensively. Everything came back within normal parameters. Amara shook her head. You tested for common markers, but there is a rare enzyme deficiency that would not appear on standard panels. It presents similarly to blood cell destruction because the liver fails to process certain proteins, which then accumulate and cause cellular damage throughout the body. The condition is called Henderson-Burke syndrome. There have been fewer than 60 documented cases worldwide, and most of them were misdiagnosed until autopsy. The room went silent. Dr. Wells stared at Amara, his mind racing through decades of medical training, searching for any reference to the condition she had named. He found nothing. I have never heard of Henderson-Burke syndrome, he admitted. It was documented in a Swiss medical journal in 2019, Amara replied. A research team in Geneva identified it while studying unexplained infant mortality in a small alpine village. The enzyme deficiency is genetic, passed through maternal lines, and it only manifests under specific conditions, usually triggered by stress during birth. Denise, who had been listening in stunned silence, stepped forward. She looked at Amara with an intensity that bordered on desperation. You are saying you know what is wrong with my baby? Amara turned to face her fully. I believe I do, she said, and if I am right, there is a treatment. It is not complicated. It is not experimental. It is a specific combination of nutrients and a synthetic enzyme that can be administered intravenously. The Swiss team used it successfully in 3 cases. All 3 infants survived. Dr. Wells held up a hand. This is extraordinary, he said carefully. But I cannot administer a treatment based on an obscure case study from a foreign journal. I would need to verify the research, consult with specialists, go through proper channels. How long does the baby have? Rosa interrupted. The doctor hesitated. Based on current trajectory, he admitted, perhaps 48 hours, possibly less. Rosa looked at him steadily. Then perhaps proper channels can wait. The next 6 hours were a blur of phone calls, database searches, and heated discussions in conference rooms. Dr. Wells contacted the research team in Geneva, waking them in the middle of the night, and spoke with the lead physician who had documented the syndrome. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and when it ended, Dr. Wells sat in his office with his head in his hands, overwhelmed by what he had learned. Everything Amara had said was accurate. The syndrome existed, the treatment protocol was real, and the symptoms matched the baby's condition with remarkable precision. But there was still the matter of verification. The hospital's ethics board needed to approve any deviation from standard treatment, and the board could not convene until the following morning. Dr. Wells explained this to Amara with genuine frustration, his voice tight with the knowledge that bureaucracy might cost a child his life. Amara listened calmly, then asked a single question. Is there anything in the treatment protocol that would harm the baby if I am wrong? Dr. Wells considered this carefully. The treatment consisted of a vitamin compound and a synthetic enzyme, both of which were already approved for use in infants. The dosage was conservative. The delivery method was standard. If Amara was wrong, the treatment would simply have no effect. It would not accelerate the baby's decline. No, he admitted. There is no significant risk. Then you have a choice, Amara said. You can wait for permission that may come too late, or you can act on what you know to be true and accept the consequences. Dr. Wells looked at her for a long moment. In 30 years of medicine, he had never been in a situation quite like this. He had built his career on evidence-based practice, on rigorous protocols, on the careful accumulation of data before making decisions. But he had also become a doctor because he wanted to save lives, and right now, there was a life slipping away while he waited for a committee to convene. He made his decision. By midnight, the treatment had been administered. The synthetic enzyme, flown in from a pharmaceutical facility in Chicago on an emergency basis, entered the baby's bloodstream through a port in his tiny arm. The vitamin compound followed, a precise mixture calculated according to the Geneva Protocol. Dr. Wells monitored every step personally, checking and rechecking the dosages, watching the monitors for any sign of adverse reaction. Denise stood at the window, her hands pressed against the glass, unable to look away. Rosa stood beside her, a steadying presence in the chaos. And Amara sat in a chair in the corner of the room, her eyes closed, her lips moving silently in what might have been a prayer or might have been a recitation of medical data. It was impossible to tell. The first change came at 3 in the morning. The baby's heart rate, which had been erratic for days, began to stabilize. The numbers on the monitor shifted, climbing toward normal parameters with each passing minute. Dr. Wells leaned forward, scarcely daring to breathe, watching the data scroll across the screen. By dawn, the baby's color had begun to change. The grayish pallor that had haunted his skin for nearly 2 weeks faded, replaced by a healthy pink that spread from his chest to his extremities. His breathing, once labored and mechanical, grew stronger and more rhythmic. The machines that had been keeping him alive began to report readings that Dr. Wells had not dared to hope for. At 7 in the morning, the baby opened his eyes. Denise collapsed against the window, her body shaking with sobs that she had held inside for days. Rosa caught her, held her upright, whispered words of comfort that were drowned out by the sound of monitors beeping and nurses rushing into the room. Dr. Wells stood motionless, staring at the infant in the incubator as if witnessing a miracle, which, in a sense, he was. Amara remained in her chair, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. She did not seek credit. She did not demand recognition. She simply observed the fruits of her knowledge and felt, for the first time in her life, that her existence had meaning beyond survival. The news spread through the hospital within hours. A baby who had been hours from death was now stable and improving. The treatment protocol, once obscure and forgotten in a Swiss medical journal, was being documented and shared with researchers around the world. Dr. Wells, who had spent his career following rules, found himself celebrated for breaking them. But in every interview, every conversation, every moment when someone tried to credit him with the save, he pointed them toward the quiet young woman who had arrived on the back of a motorcycle and changed everything. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this happen in the real world every day, and the only way to hear them is to be part of this community. One click. That is all it takes to make sure you never miss a moment when ordinary people do extraordinary things. The Iron Guardians remained in Memphis for 3 days. They set up camp in a motel near the hospital, taking shifts to ensure that someone was always available if Denise or Amara needed anything. Marcus spent hours sitting with Denise in the hospital cafeteria, listening to her story, offering the kind of steady presence that only someone who had faced their own share of darkness could provide. Rosa coordinated with local social services to ensure that Denise would have support when she brought her son home. And the other members of the club did what they always did. They showed up, asked nothing in return, and reminded everyone around them that community was not a word, but an action. Amara visited the NICU every morning, checking on the baby's progress, answering questions from the medical staff, and gradually earning the respect of doctors who had initially dismissed her as a curiosity. Her knowledge was not limited to the single syndrome she had identified. In casual conversations, she demonstrated an understanding of medicine that rivaled physicians with decades of experience. Dr. Wells, who had initially viewed her with skepticism, found himself seeking her opinion on other cases, valuing her perspective, and wondering how the world had failed to notice someone so remarkable. On the 3rd day, he made her an offer. He explained that St. Michael's had a program for exceptional individuals without traditional credentials, a pathway that could lead to formal medical training while allowing her to work alongside experienced physicians. It was not charity, he emphasized. It was recognition of a talent that deserved cultivation. He wanted her on his team. Amara listened to the offer in silence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked if she could think about it, and Dr. Wells agreed without hesitation. He had learned in the past few days that Amara did nothing without careful consideration. That evening, she sat with Rosa and Marcus in the motel parking lot, watching the sun set over the Memphis skyline. The air was warm and thick with humidity, and the distant sound of traffic provided a constant backdrop to their conversation. "What are you going to do?" Rosa asked. Amara shrugged. "I do not know yet. Part of me wants to stay. Part of me feels like I do not belong here. Marcus took a long drink from his water bottle before speaking. You know what I learned in the war? He said. Belonging is not about where you are. It is about what you do when you get there. You showed up for that baby. You did something nobody else could do. That means you belong. But I do not have any of the things these doctors have, Amara replied. No degrees, no certificates, no proof that I am qualified to do what I did. Rosa laughed softly. Girl, you just saved a baby's life. That is all the proof anyone needs. The conversation continued long into the night, covering topics that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. By the time the stars appeared overhead, Amara had made her decision. She would accept Dr. Wells's offer. She would stay in Memphis. She would take the path that had been opened for her and see where it led. The next morning, she walked into Dr. Wells's office and told him her answer. The look on his face, relief, gratitude, and something that might have been pride, was worth more than any credential she could have earned. The baby, whom Denise had named Michael, after the hospital that had given him a second chance, continued to improve over the following weeks. The Henderson-Burke syndrome, once a death sentence, became a manageable condition with ongoing treatment. Denise, who had prepared herself for the worst, found herself planning for a future she had thought impossible. She talked about going back to school, about finding a better job, about giving her son every opportunity she had never had. And through it all, Amara was there. She visited Michael every day, tracking his progress, adjusting his treatment when necessary, and forming a bond with Denise that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. They became friends, then something closer. Two women from different worlds who had found each other in the space between tragedy and hope. The Iron Guardians returned to Mississippi after the first week, their mission complete. But they did not disappear from Amara's life. Rosa called every Sunday, checking in, offering advice, and reminding Amara that she always had a home in Clarksdale if Memphis did not work out. Marcus sent letters, actual handwritten letters, which Amara found both charming and old-fashioned, filled with stories from the road and wisdom earned through years of living. 6 months later, Amara stood in a conference room at St. Michael's Hospital, presenting her first research paper to a gathering of physicians and researchers. The topic was Henderson-Burke syndrome, its diagnosis, treatment, and the importance of looking beyond standard protocols when facing rare conditions. She spoke clearly and confidently, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had earned her place through action rather than accreditation. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Dr. Wells sat in the front row, beaming like a proud father. Beside him sat Denise, holding a healthy, smiling Michael in her arms. And in the back of the room, having ridden 300 miles through the night to be there, stood Marcus Cole and the Iron Guardians, their leather vests out of place among the white coats, but their presence exactly where it needed to be. If you are watching this right now and feeling something in your chest, I want you to do one thing for me. Leave a comment that says, I believe in second chances. That is all. Just those 4 words. Because every time someone types those words, it reminds the algorithm, and more importantly, it reminds the world, that there are still people who believe that redemption is possible. Type it now. I believe in second chances. After the presentation, there was a small reception in the hospital atrium. Colleagues offered congratulations. Reporters asked questions. And through it all, Amara remained the same quiet, observant person she had always been, grateful for the attention, but uncomfortable in the spotlight. It was Marcus who finally pulled her aside, away from the crowd, to a quiet corner near the elevators. You did good, kid, he said. Real good. Amara smiled. I had help. We all have help, Marcus replied. That is kind of the point. Nobody does anything alone. The trick is learning to accept the help when it comes. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the crowd through the glass doors of the atrium. What happens now? Amara asked. Marcus shrugged. Now, you keep going. You save more babies. You teach other doctors what you know. And when things get hard, because they will get hard, you remember that you have people who believe in you. That is worth more than any degree or certificate or fancy title. That is what makes the difference. Amara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She had spent her entire life feeling like an outsider, like someone who did not fit into the categories the world had created. But standing here, in this hospital that had become her home, surrounded by people who had fought for her and believed in her, she realized that fitting in had never been the goal. The goal was finding the people who saw you for who you were, and choosing to stand beside them. The Iron Guardians left Memphis that evening, their engines rumbling through the city streets as the sun dipped below the horizon. Amara stood on the hospital steps and watched them go, her hand raised in farewell. She knew she would see them again. She knew that the bond they had formed was not temporary, but she also knew that this was her place now, this hospital, this work, this life that she was building from nothing. Inside, Michael was sleeping peacefully in the pediatric ward, his monitors showing steady, healthy readings. Denise sat beside his crib, reading a book she had borrowed from the hospital library, her face relaxed in a way it had not been for months. When Amara entered the room, Denise looked up and smiled. "They are gone?" Denise asked. Amara nodded. "For now." Denise set down her book and gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Sit with us for a while." Amara sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply existed in the same space, two women who had found each other through circumstances neither could have predicted, sharing a peace that words would only diminish. Finally, Denise broke the silence. "I keep trying to figure out how to thank you," she said, "but nothing seems big enough." Amara considered this. "You do not need to thank me," she said. "Seeing him healthy is enough." Denise shook her head. "No. You need to understand something. When the doctors told me there was nothing they could do, I felt like I was already dead, like the world had ended and nobody had bothered to tell me. And then you walked in, this young woman I had never met, with no credentials, no authority, nothing but knowledge and the courage to use it, and you gave me my son back. That is not something I can repay. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life." Amara looked at the sleeping baby, watching his tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. She thought about her own childhood, the foster homes, the loneliness, the years of feeling invisible. She thought about the medical journals she had read by flashlight, the questions no one would answer, the knowledge she had accumulated with no clear purpose, and she thought about how all of it, every struggle, every disappointment, every moment of despair, had led her to this room, this baby, this mother who was looking at her with gratitude she did not know how to accept. "Maybe that is how it works," Amara said quietly. "Maybe we do not understand why things happen until we are standing on the other side looking back." The weeks turned into months, and the months began to accumulate into something that felt like a life. Amara threw herself into her work, spending long hours in the hospital, learning from Dr. Wells and the other physicians, and slowly building a reputation that extended beyond the walls of St. Michael's. Her paper on Henderson-Burke syndrome was published in a major medical journal, and soon she was receiving invitations to speak at conferences, to consult on difficult cases, to share her knowledge with a world that had finally started paying attention. But she never lost touch with her roots. She returned to Clarksdale every few months, staying at Rose's shelter and helping with the young people who reminded her of herself. She joined the Iron Guardians on their charity rides whenever her schedule allowed, feeling the wind on her face and the rumble of the engine beneath her, remembering the journey that had brought her to Memphis. And she stayed close to Denise and Michael, watching the boy grow from a fragile infant into a curious, healthy toddler who called her Auntie Mara and demanded bedtime stories whenever she visited. 1 year after the night she had walked into St. Michael's Hospital, Amara received a letter in the mail. It was from a medical school in Nashville, offering her a full scholarship to pursue a doctoral degree. The letter explained that her work had come to the attention of the admissions committee, and they believed she represented exactly the kind of unconventional thinker their program needed. All she had to do was say yes. She sat with the letter for a long time, reading it over and over, trying to process what it meant. A year ago, she had been a homeless teenager with no future. Now she was being offered a path that most people could only dream of. It felt unreal, like something that happened to other people, people with normal backgrounds, stable families, the kind of privilege she had never known. That evening, she called Marcus. "I got accepted to medical school," she said without preamble. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a deep, rumbling laugh. "Well, look at that. The girl who taught doctors is going to become one herself." "I do not know if I should accept," Amara admitted. "It feels like too much. Like I do not deserve it." Marcus's voice grew serious. "Let me tell you something, kid. Deserving has nothing to do with it. You think I deserved to come home from the war when better men than me did not? You think Denise deserved to lose her baby before you showed up? The world does not give us what we deserve. It gives us what comes, and we make something of it, or we do not. The question is not whether you deserve this opportunity. The question is what you are going to do with it." Amara closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She thought about Michael, about Denise, about all the patients she had helped in the past year. She thought about the future, about the children she had not yet met, the lives she had not yet saved. She thought about the girl who had aged out of foster care with nothing, and she realized that girl was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who had been tested, transformed, and given a purpose she had never expected. "I am going to say yes," she said. "Good," Marcus replied. "That is exactly what I wanted to hear." The acceptance ceremony at the medical school took place on a crisp autumn morning, with leaves falling from the trees and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Amara stood among the incoming class, wearing a simple dress that Rosa had helped her pick out, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. The dean gave a speech about the responsibility of becoming a physician, about the lives that would depend on their knowledge and judgment, about the privilege and burden of the profession. Amara listened with an intensity that set her apart from her classmates, absorbing every word, committing every idea to memory. When the ceremony ended, she walked outside to find a familiar sight waiting in the parking lot. 18 motorcycles stood in perfect formation, their chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. And standing beside them were the Iron Guardians, all of them present for her special day. Marcus stepped forward, his gray beard trimmed for the occasion, his leather vest polished and proud. He held out a small box wrapped in brown paper. "This is from all of us," he said. "Something to remember where you came from." Amara opened the box carefully. Inside was a patch. Not the full patch of the Iron Guardians, which was reserved for full members, but a smaller one, designed just for her. It showed a single feather crossed with a stethoscope, and beneath it were the words, "Knowledge is protection." She looked up at Marcus, tears forming in her eyes. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Marcus replied. "Just wear it. And remember that you are never alone." She hugged him then, this gruff veteran biker who had become something like a father to her, and he held her with the gentleness of a man who understood exactly how fragile and precious life could be. Around them, the other guardians smiled and cheered, their voices carrying across the parking lot like a celebration of everything good in the world. 4 years later, Dr. Amara Johnson walked the halls of St. Michael's Hospital with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place. The white coat she wore bore her name embroidered in blue thread, and the stethoscope around her neck had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. She had specialized in pediatric rare diseases, drawn inevitably back to the field that had started her journey, and she had already made significant contributions to the diagnosis and treatment of conditions that most physicians never encountered. But her greatest accomplishment was not a paper or a protocol. It was a young boy named Michael, now 5 years old, who ran down the hospital corridor with boundless energy and threw himself into her arms whenever he saw her. "Auntie Mara!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "Mama said you were coming to my birthday party." Amara laughed and scooped him up, spinning him in a circle that made him squeal with delight. "I would not miss it for the world." Denise appeared around the corner, smiling at the scene. She had changed so much in the years since that terrible night. She'd gone back to school, earned a nursing degree, and now worked in the very hospital where her son had been saved. Her life, once measured in desperate hours, now stretched forward with possibility and hope. "Thank you," she said softly, as she did every time she saw Amara. "Thank you for everything." Amara set Michael down and watched him run off to explore the waiting room. "You have thanked me enough," she said. "1,000 times over, and I will thank you 1,000 more." Denise reached out and squeezed her hand. "You gave me my son. You gave me my life. There is no limit to my gratitude." They stood together, watching Michael stack magazines into towers and knock them down with theatrical crashes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The intercom announced a code blue on the 3rd floor. The ordinary rhythms of the hospital continued around them, a symphony of healing that never stopped. That evening, after her shift ended, Amara rode her motorcycle through the streets of Memphis. She had learned to ride during her 3rd year of medical school, taught by Marcus during a summer visit to Mississippi, and it had become her favorite way to decompress after long days. The wind cleared her mind. The rhythm of the engine matched the rhythm of her thoughts, and the freedom of the open road reminded her of everything she had overcome. She rode to the riverfront and parked near the water, watching the lights of the city reflect off the Mississippi. The river flowed past with ancient patience, carrying the same water that had witnessed centuries of human struggle and triumph. Amara thought about her journey, the foster homes, the shelters, the loneliness that had once seemed endless. She thought about the baby in the incubator, the doctors who had given up, the treatment that had saved a life. She thought about Marcus and Rosa and the Iron Guardians, about Denise and Michael, about Dr. Wells and the colleagues who had become her family, and she realized something that felt both simple and profound. She had spent so many years feeling like she did not belong anywhere. But belonging was not a place, it was a choice. It was the decision to show up for others, to use whatever gifts you had in service of those who needed them, to build connections that transcended circumstance and background and all the categories the world used to separate people. She belonged because she had chosen to belong. She was home because she had decided to stay. If you watched this far, it is because you felt something. It is because this story touched a place inside you that believes in courage and compassion and the power of ordinary people to change the world. I want to hear from you. Leave a comment that says, "I watched this far." That simple message tells me that you are part of this community, that you believe in these stories, and that you will be here for the next one. Type it now. I watched this far, and while you are at it, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories like this deserve to spread. Because hope is contagious. And because the only way to change the world is one heart at a time. The birthday party for Michael was held in Denise's apartment on a Saturday afternoon, with balloons covering every surface and a cake shaped like a fire truck taking pride of place on the kitchen table. The guest list included hospital colleagues, neighbors, and a surprising number of bikers in leather vests who had ridden 300 miles to celebrate with a boy they considered family. Marcus stood in the corner, his massive frame incongruous among the streamers and party favors, watching Michael tear through his presents with the enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster. Rosa sat beside Denise, the two women laughing at something on Rosa's phone. And Amara moved through the room, refilling cups and straightening decorations, making sure everyone had everything they needed. When it came time to blow out the candles, Michael insisted that Amara stand beside him. He grabbed her hand and looked up at her with the complete trust of a child who had never known fear. "Make a wish with me, Auntie Mara," he said. She closed her eyes, and for a moment the noise of the party faded away. She thought about wishes, about the ones she had made as a child, desperate and lonely, hoping for things she could not even name. She thought about how few of those wishes had come true in the way she expected, and how many had come true in ways she never could have imagined. "Ready?" Michael asked. She opened her eyes and smiled. "Ready." They blew out the candles together, and the room erupted in cheers. Michael's face was covered in frosting within minutes, and the party continued with the chaotic joy that defined childhood celebrations everywhere. Later, when the guests had gone and the apartment was quiet, Amara helped Denise clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, gathering wrapping paper and washing dishes, their movements synchronized by years of friendship. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come?" Denise asked suddenly. Amara paused, a plate in her hands. "Sometimes," but I try not to dwell on it. Denise nodded slowly. I used to think about it all the time. Every time I looked at Michael, I would imagine the alternative. It was unbearable. But now I just feel grateful, every single day. For you, for the guardians, for the chance to watch my son grow up. Amara set down the plate and turned to face her friend. That is what matters, she said. Not the alternative, not the fear, just the gratitude, just the life we have now. Denise smiled through tears that she did not bother to wipe away. When did you get so wise? Amara laughed. I learned from the best. They finished cleaning and sat together on the couch, watching Michael sleep in his bedroom through the open door. The apartment was small and cluttered with toys, but it was filled with something that no amount of money could buy. Love, pure and unconditional. The kind that transformed ordinary moments into sacred ones. Thank you, Denise said again. One last time. And Amara, who had once believed she would never belong anywhere, simply smiled and said, Thank you for letting me be part of your family. The years continued to pass, marked by small triumphs and quiet growth. Amara became one of the leading experts in rare pediatric diseases, publishing research that changed how doctors approach conditions once considered untreatable. She mentored young physicians, always looking for the unconventional thinkers, the ones who saw patterns others missed, the ones who reminded her of herself. She never forgot where she came from, and she never stopped reaching back to help others make the same journey. Michael grew into a bright, curious boy who told everyone he was going to be a doctor like his Auntie Mara. He asked questions constantly, wanted to know how everything worked, and showed the same intensity of focus that Amara had possessed as a child. When he was old enough, she began teaching him about the human body, starting with simple concepts and gradually building to more complex ideas. He absorbed it all with the natural aptitude of someone born for the work. The Iron Guardians continued their mission, riding the highways of America in search of those who needed protection. Marcus retired from active leadership, but remained a guiding presence, his wisdom shaped by decades of service. Rosa expanded her shelter in Clarksdale, creating programs that helped at-risk youth find their paths. And the bond between them all, the bikers, the doctor, the mother, and son, remained unbroken, a testament to the power of showing up for each other. On the 10th anniversary of the night Amara had walked into St. Michael's Hospital, a gathering was held in the hospital's main auditorium. It was billed as a celebration of collaborative medicine, but everyone who attended knew the real reason they were there. They were there to honor the young woman who had saved a baby's life, and in doing so, had reminded an entire institution what it meant to practice medicine with courage and humility. Amara stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces that included colleagues, friends, and family. She saw Dr. Wells, now retired but still sharp as ever, beaming from the front row. She saw Denise, holding a 10-year-old Michael by the hand, her eyes bright with pride. She saw Marcus and Rosa and the Iron Guardians, their leather vests standing out among the medical professionals, their presence a reminder of the unconventional path that had led her here. She took a deep breath and began to speak. 10 years ago, I walked into this hospital with nothing but knowledge and the courage to use it. I had no degree, no credentials, no reason to believe that anyone would listen to what I had to say. But I came anyway because there was a child who needed help, and I believed I could provide it. She paused, letting the weight of the memory settle over the room. I have thought a lot about that night over the years. I have asked myself why I did it, why I took a risk that could have ended in failure and humiliation. And the answer I keep coming back to is simple. I did it because I was not willing to look away, because I had been given a gift, the ability to see what others missed, and refusing to use that gift felt like a betrayal of everything I believed. The room was silent, every eye fixed on the woman at the podium. Medicine is not just about knowledge, Amara continued. It is not just about technology or research or the latest treatments. Medicine is about courage. It is about the willingness to act when action is needed, to speak when silence would be easier, to stand up for patients who cannot stand for themselves. Every person in this room has the ability to save lives, but that ability means nothing unless we are willing to use it, even when the risk seems too great, even when the odds seem impossible. She looked directly at Michael, who was watching her with the rapt attention of a child who understood, on some deep level, that he was the reason she was standing here. I saved one baby 10 years ago, but in the years since, I have watched the ripples of that act spread in ways I never could have predicted. I have seen a mother rebuild her life. I have seen a community come together. I have seen colleagues inspired to take their own risks, to trust their own instincts, to practice medicine with the courage it demands. That is the power of a single act of courage. It does not end when the act is complete. It continues, growing and multiplying, touching lives we will never know, and changing a world we will never see. She paused again, gathering herself for the final words. So, I want to leave you with a challenge. Do not be content to follow the rules. Do not be satisfied with standard protocols and accepted practices. Be the person who looks deeper. Be the person who asks the uncomfortable questions. Be the person who refuses to give up when everyone else has accepted defeat. Because somewhere out there, right now, there is a patient waiting for someone exactly like you, someone who will see what no one else can see and have the courage to act on it. The room erupted in applause, and Amara stepped back from the podium with a humility that made the ovation feel both deserved and uncomfortable. She had never sought recognition. She had never wanted to be a symbol. But standing here, surrounded by the evidence of everything her life had become, she allowed herself a moment of pride. After the ceremony, she found Michael waiting for her near the exit. He was taller now, his features beginning to hint at the man he would become, but his eyes held the same innocent curiosity they had always possessed. "Auntie Mara," he said, "that was a really good speech." She smiled and knelt to meet his gaze. "Thank you, Michael. That means a lot coming from you." He looked at her with sudden seriousness. "I am going to be a doctor," he announced, "just like you. And I am going to save babies, too." Amara felt tears prick her eyes, but she held them back. "I know you will," she said. "I know you will." They walked out of the hospital together, joining the crowd that had gathered to congratulate her. The sun was setting over Memphis, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of motorcycle engines rumbled, a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. She had started with nothing. She had been given a gift she did not understand and a path she could not see. But she had followed it anyway, trusting in the knowledge she had accumulated and the courage she had cultivated, and it had led her to this moment, surrounded by family, celebrated by colleagues, and filled with a sense of purpose that would sustain her for the rest of her life. This is not the end of the story. It is merely the end of this chapter, because stories of courage and compassion never truly end. They continue, passed from heart to heart, inspiring new generations to see what others miss and act when action is needed. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of human connection and the importance of never giving up, then I have one final request. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Hit the like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, leave a comment. Tell me what this story meant to you. Tell me about the heroes in your own life. Tell me that you believe, as I do, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Because that is what this channel is about. That is what these stories are about. And that is what you are about, whether you know it yet or not. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. And I will see you in the next story.